Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by calling out a lie that I think we've all been told, probably since gym class in elementary school.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
It's this lie of Cartesian dualism, but, applied to fitness.
Yeah.
We treat the mind and the body as these two totally separate, distinct things.
Right.
You've got the will, that's the mind, and it's supposed to bark orders. And then you've got the machine, the body, that either, obeys or it fails.
It's the classic mind over matter fallacy, isn't it? We just assume that if you're not exercising, it's a failure of the command center.
Exactly.
You just didn't yell loud enough at your legs to get off the sofa.
You just didn't want it badly enough. But looking at this stack of research we have on the table today, and we're talking about some really recent papers from Nature, Neuron, and Cells, mostly from late 2025 and into early 2026. That entire model is, well, it's frankly embarrassing. It's just so outdated.
It is.
The body isn't some machine that just takes orders. It's more like a shadow government.
That is a much, much more accurate framework. We are looking at a biological coalition of different factions that can and will veto your conscious decisions before you've even had a chance to lace up your sneakers.
And we're going to be talking about 3 specific players in this shadow government today. I mean, the list is incredible. First, we have the gut microbiome, which is apparently running this chemical bribery scheme to get you moving.
A very effective one.
Then we have a very specific cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus, the VMH, that fundamentally changes how we even understand the concept of endurance memory.
It's not in the muscle. That's the big reveal.
And then, to top it all off, we have this local to global aging theory that suggests our organs are all aging at different speeds and literally dragging each other down.
What I love about this collection of sources, though, is how it shifts the whole conversation. It moves us away from this very simple idea of exercise makes you healthy and into something much more sophisticated, which is that exercise is a signaling language. It's information. And if you don't speak the language, or if your internal organs are, jamming the signal, the workout just doesn't work.
Okay, that's the scary part we absolutely need to get to. The idea that you can put in all the physical labor and get 0 credit for it biologically. It's terrifying.
It is.
But let's start with the first hurdle, the motivation piece, the I don't want to get off the couch problem.
The universal struggle. We've all been there.
Right. Now, I read this 2022 Nature study on the gut-brain axis, and honestly, it made me question every single time I've ever felt lazy, because the researchers essentially found that in mice, the desire to run, and I want to stress this, not the ability, but the actual desire, was being dictated by their bacteria.
This was such a landmark paper, and it's because it controlled for all the variables that usually muck up these kinds of studies. Well, usually, if a mouse on a treadmill suddenly stops running, you assume it's sick or it's tired or maybe it's obese, or a dozen reasons. But here, they took these high-performing mice. I mean, these were the track stars of the lab, basically.
The little Olympians.
The little Olympians. And they treated them with broad-spectrum antibiotics. They just completely wiped the microbiome clean.
And the running stopped, just like that.
It plummeted. But here is the key, and I know you caught this when you were digging through the supplementary data. The mice weren't sick. They tested everything. Their coordination, their muscle strength, all the palpable markers of illness. The hardware was fine.
The software had crashed.
The software had crashed. The motivation was gone.
Okay, I have to push on this because the skeptic in me immediately says, okay, but antibiotics make you feel gross. We've all been on a Z-Pack and just felt completely lethargic. How do we know this wasn't just, general malaise?
And that's exactly what the peer reviewers asked. It's the first question you have to answer. But the researchers did something very, very clever. They didn't just wipe the gut. They identified the specific neural pathway that was broken.
So they traced the call.
They traced the call. If it was just a case of feeling gross, you'd expect to see a systemic inflammatory response or maybe a big drop in motor cortex activity. They didn't see that. What they saw was a very specific silence right in the brain's reward circuit.
This is where we need to get technical.
Yeah.
Because the mechanism is just wild. It's not magic. It's pure chemistry. The bacteria are producing these things called fatty acid amides, FAAs.
Right. Specifically, things like N-oleolethylamine and a few other related metabolites. And if you look at their structure, they're what we call endocannabinoid-like.
Endocannabinoid. So that implies they are hitting the same systems that, say, cannabis hits.
Loosely, yes, but peripherally. So it's not like they're going straight to your brain and getting you high. What's happening is that these FAAs are binding to TRPV1 receptors in the gut, not in the brain.
And TRPV1. Wait, that's the capsaicin receptor, isn't it? That's what makes chili peppers feel hot.
Exactly. So just picture this for a second.
Yeah.
You have these specific bacteria, the paper-identified species like Eubacterium and Coprococcus, and they're in your colon just churning out these fatty acid amides from the food you ate.
Okay.
These metabolites then go and, for lack of a better word, they tickle the TRPV1 sensory neurons that are lining your intestine. That sensory neuron then sends a signal up the spinal afferent nerves. It's like a hotline.
A hotline straight to the brain.
Straight to the brain, but not just anywhere in the brain. It hits a very specific target.
The ventral striatum.
The reward center, the absolute seat of dopamine.
So let me just trace this pathway to make sure I've got it. It's bacteria in your gut make a chemical.
Yep, the FAAs.
That chemical hits a nerve in the gut wall.
The spicy food nerve.
That nerve sends a signal up the spine directly to the reward center of the brain, and suddenly, boom, a dopamine dump.
Precisely. And here is the absolute kicker. This dopamine dump only seems to happen during the activity. The bacteria essentially gate the runner's high. They hold it hostage.
What do you mean by gate?
I mean that if the bacteria are present and healthy, the equation is running equals pleasure. You get the dopamine reward. But if the bacteria are gone, like in the antibiotic-treated mice, the equation is running equals nothing.
Just exertion. Just pain.
Just pain. The reward is gone.
That is the literal biological definition of a bribe. The bacteria are saying, listen, pal, if you get up and move this body, maybe run to the next food source, I will give you a little hit of dopamine to make it feel good.
From an evolutionary standpoint, it makes perfect sense. Think about a foraging animal. Energy is incredibly expensive. You don't want to be burning precious calories running around for no reason at all.
Sure, you'd starve.
But if you have a healthy, diverse gut microbiome, it's a signal. It's a signal that you're well fed enough to justify the energy expenditure. The bacteria are essentially driving their hostess to go out and explore the environment, to find more and different kinds of food to keep them happy.
This just completely reframes the idea of a lazy person. If someone says, I hate running, it never feels good, it's just awful, we usually tell them to just push through it. No pain, no gain.
Right. Grit and determination.
But based on this, they might literally be chemically incapable of feeling the reward. They might just lack the specific Coprococcus species they need to trigger that TRPV1 hotline to the brain.
That is the profound implication of this work, that inter-individual variability in exercise motivation might be less about character and much more about ecology. It's about the ecosystem in your gut.
Is there other data to back that up?
Oh, yeah. This is backed up by all the germ-free mouse data. Mice that are born and raised in a completely sterile bubble with no bacteria at all, they run significantly less than conventional mice. But then, if you give them a fecal transplant from the runner mice,
the motivation just shoots up.
It's like flipping a switch. Suddenly they want to run.
So you're saying the couch potato phenotype is transmissible?
In a controlled laboratory setting, yes. You can transfer motivation from one mouse to another through their microbes.
That is terrifying and incredibly hopeful at the exact same time.
Yeah.
But it also implies that diet is the main lever here. You can't just wish for these bacteria to show up. You can't just will them into existence.
No, absolutely not. You have to feed them. These fatty acid amides, they don't just appear out of thin air. They are metabolites. They're the downstream products of your dietary intake.
So if you're eating a diet that starves these specific species?
Say diet high in sugar, low in fiber, full of ultra-processed fats.
You break the chain at the very first link.
You break the chain. You don't produce the FAAs, which means you don't stimulate the TRPV1 neurons, which means you don't get the dopamine reward from exercise. And then what happens?
And then you stop moving, which I imagine makes your gut health even worse.
It's a feedback loop, a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
You could argue that the sedentary death spiral that we see in so many people, it begins in the colon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the getting started problem. That's motivation, the first member of the shadow government. But let's say we've either beaten the bacteria into submission, or maybe we've bribed them with a high-fiber diet, and we are finally on the treadmill. We are moving.
We've overcome inertia.
We've overcome inertia. But now we run into the second member of the shadow government, the hypothalamus.
Specifically, the ventromedial hypothalamus, the VMH.
This is the study from Neuron, published in February 2026. The headline was something like, Exercise Rewires the Brain to Build Endurance. Now, I want to be really clear here because this is important. We aren't talking about mental toughness. we aren't talking about the brain just pushing you to run a little bit longer. We are talking about the brain physically reaching out and altering the muscles themselves.
This is the huge paradigm shift from what we could call local adaptation to central command. The old view was really simple.
What was it?
It was that you go for a run, your leg muscles get stressed, they run out of oxygen, and that stress signal causes the muscle cells themselves to say, hey, we should probably build more mitochondria to handle this better next time. The brain was just the driver. It started the car, but the engine upgraded itself.
But this new study says the brain is actually the project manager. It's overseeing the entire renovation.
It's the general contractor. It's signing off on the work orders. The researchers identified a very specific population of neurons. They're called SF1 neurons, or steroidogenic factor 1 neurons, located in the VMH.
And these neurons are usually associated with what?
Metabolism, blood sugar control, appetite. That's their day job.
Yep.
But the researchers found that during exercise, these specific neurons just light up like a Christmas tree.
But that's not the really interesting part, is it? The most interesting part wasn't what happened during the run. It was what happened after.
The afterburn window. This is the crucial finding of the whole paper. The SF1 neurons, they stayed highly active for at least 1 full hour after the treadmill stopped moving.
Why? What on earth are they doing for an hour?
They're consolidating the event. I think the best analogy is saving a file on a hard drive. The typing, that's the running, is done, but the computer still needs to process all that data and actually write it to the disk. If you pull the plug too soon,
You lose the file.
you lose the file. The work disappears.
And they proved this wasn't just some incidental firing. They did a blockade experiment that is just, it's mind-blowing.
They did, and this is where the technology just gets into the realm of science fiction. They use a technique called optogenetics.
Which is basically using light to turn neurons on or off in real time.
In a living, breathing animal. So they let the mice run their full training session. The mice did the work. They put in the miles. But the absolute second the treadmill stopped, the researchers use a fiber optic light to silence those SF1 neurons, but only for that 1 hour post-exercise window.
So they let the mouse type the whole document, but then they pulled the plug on the computer right as it was hitting save.
Exactly that. And the result was just devastating for the mice's progress. Despite doing the exact same training protocol for weeks, the mice in the blockade group showed no significant improvement in their endurance. None.
Wait, not at all.
They didn't get faster. They didn't run longer. Their baseline metabolic rate didn't improve. It was as if the training had never happened.
That's profound.
Yeah.
It means you can do the work mechanically, you move the weight, you ran the miles, but if the VMH doesn't fire afterwards, your body doesn't adapt. You get no credit.
The signal to upgrade the hardware was blocked at the source.
So let's trace that signal. How does a tiny neuron in the middle of the brain tell a quadricep muscle, hundreds of millions of cells away, to build a new mitochondria? What's the mechanism?
It uses the sympathetic nervous system, the SNS, the fight-or-flight system.
Okay.
These SF1 neurons essentially modulate the sympathetic tone, the frequency of the signals that get sent out to the skeletal muscle. It's a very specific frequency of electrical and chemical signaling. And when the muscle receives this post-workout signal from the brain, it triggers the expression of a protein called PGC1 alpha.
PGC1 alpha. I've heard of that. That's like the holy grail of endurance proteins, right?
It is the master transcriptional coactivator. It's the foreman on the construction site. It's the one that turns on all the genes for mitochondrial biogenesis, for building new power plants in the cells.
And the study was even more specific than that, wasn't it?
It was. It found that this brain signal specifically upregulated isoform 2 of PGC1 alpha.
Isoforms are like different versions of the same software, right?
Yeah.
Or different keys for the same lock.
That's a perfect way to think about it. And it seems that isoform 2 is particularly sensitive to this neural input from the brain. If you don't get that specific post-exercise signal from the SF1 neurons, PGC1 alpha isoform 2 stays completely flat. No new mitochondria, no endurance gain, period.
This brings me back to the busy brain hypothesis we sort of teased in the intro. If this SF1 firing is absolutely required for the adaptation to happen, and it happens after the workout is over, what happens if we interrupt it?
That is the billion-dollar question for modern humans, isn't it? The study was done in mice, and after a run, mice generally just, they chill out, they groom themselves, they rest.
But humans, We jump off the treadmill and immediately dive into a stressful work email.
Or we rush to pick up the kids from school, or we start scrolling through anxiety-inducing news on our phones.
If the SF1 neurons are part of the hypothalamus, which is the master regulator of stress and the whole fight-or-flight response, could high cortisol levels from a stressful task effectively mimic that light-based blockade they did in the lab?
It is extremely likely. Stress engages the exact same circuitry. If your hypothalamus is being flooded with danger signals from a stressful work call, it's very plausible that it would override or at least dampen the adaptation signal that's meant for the muscles.
So we might be chemically short-circuiting our own games.
By not recovering neurologically, we focus so much on protein shakes and ice baths. But maybe the most important recovery tool is neurological silence.
So the cool down we're always told to do isn't just about letting your heart rate come down slowly. It's about protecting that 1-hour SF1 window.
It suggests that your mental state post-exercise is at least as important as the physical effort you put in during the exercise. If you don't let the file save, you lose the data.
That dramatically changes how I look at my post-gym routine. I'm usually that person checking Slack in between sets or replying to emails on the walk home.
You might be actively, at a chemical level, sabotaging the PGC1 alpha signal.
Well, that is a properly terrifying thought to hold on to. Okay, let's zoom out. We've covered the gut, which gives us the motivation to start. We've covered the brain, which gives us the endurance memory to improve. But the third leg of this stool is this local to global theory of aging. This comes from that 2026 review in the journal Cells.
Right, and this paper is really ambitious. It's attempting to answer one of the most fundamental questions in biology: why do we die? Or maybe more accurately, how do we die?
Is it a uniform fade, where every single cell in your body just gets, say, 1% worse every year?
Or is it a domino effect? Does one critical system fail and then trigger a cascade that takes everything else down with it?
And this theory posits the domino effect. It identifies 3 specific hubs: the muscle, the gut, and the brain. And it argues that if one of these fails, it actively drags the other 2 down with it.
It's essentially the weakest link theory of physiology. You can have a perfectly healthy heart, but if your gut barrier fails and your body is flooded with inflammation, that systemic inflammation will eventually damage and kill the heart. Your body is only as young as its oldest hub.
Let's break down these hubs, because the paper goes into incredible detail on why these 3 specific organs are the dictators of aging. Hub number 1, the muscle.
And this really requires us to update our definition of what muscle is. We need to stop thinking of it as just, meat that moves bone around.
Right.
We need to start thinking of it as an endocrine organ. In fact, by mass, it is the largest gland in the entire body.
Because it's actively secreting things. It's secreting myokines.
Yes, exactly. When your muscle fibers contract, they literally squeeze out these signaling proteins called myokines. These are chemical messages that are sent out to the rest of the body. The review highlights a few really key ones. IL-6 is probably most famous.
But wait, IL-6, that's usually the bad guy, isn't it? It's a pro-inflammatory cytokine. High IL-6 is linked to all sorts of diseases.
In a chronic state, yes. If you are sedentary and obese, chronically high IL cells is very bad. But acutely, during exercise, muscle-derived IL-6 acts in a completely different way.
How so?
It acts as a metabolic regulator. It travels to the liver and says, hey, release more glucose for fuel. It goes to your fat tissue and says, start burning lipids. It's the quartermaster coordinating the body's fuel supply during the battle of exercise.
So context completely changes the message of the chemical.
It's everything. Then you have another one called irisin. This is the one that's gotten a ton of press lately. Irisin is cleaved from a membrane protein called FNDC5. And what makes irisin so special is that it can cross the blood-brain barrier.
So it's a direct message from a flexing bicep all the way to your brain.
And the message is essentially, grow. Irisin gets into the brain and it stimulates the production of BDNF brain-derived neurotrophic factor, especially in the hippocampus, the memory center. This is a huge part of why exercise is so protective against neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. It is literally your muscle tissue keeping your brain neurons alive and healthy.
So if we apply this local to global theory, if your muscles start to atrophy with age, what we call sarcopenia, you aren't just getting physically weaker.
No, it's so much worse than that.
You're cutting off the supply of irisin to your brain. You are actively starving your brain of these critical growth signals.
Precisely. Sarcopenia is a systemic catastrophe, not a local problem. The paper also talks about proteostasis, which is basically the muscle's ability to clean up its own junk proteins. As we age, muscles lose their ability to perform autophagy, the self-cleaning process.
So they get clogged up with garbage?
They get clogged up with garbage, they become dysfunctional, and they start to release these nasty inflammatory signals called senescence-associated secretory phenotypes, or SPs. Basically, your old muscles start spewing aging signals into your blood that then travel around and age your skin, your heart, your liver.
So the hub doesn't just fail, it becomes a poison factory.
Yes, and that toxic output directly triggers the breakdown of hub number 2, the gut.
We already talked about the gut for motivation, but this part of the theory is about the physical barrier itself, the great wall of the intestine.
And what's wild is that the intestinal epithelium, the lining of your gut, is only one single cell layer thick. It is incredibly fragile. Its job is this impossible task of letting all the good stuff nutrients in, but keeping all the bad stuff, bacteria and toxins, out.
And as we age, that wall starts to crumble.
The tight junctions, the little protein rivets that hold these cells together, they start to loosen up.
This is the leaky gut phenomenon.
It sounds like a wellness buzzword, but from a biological perspective, it's absolutely devastating. When that barrier leaks, things like lipopolysaccharides or LPS, which are parts of bacterial cell walls, get into the bloodstream. And LPS is profoundly inflammatory.
The body thinks it's being infected by bacteria.
Constantly. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is the very definition of inflammaging. It's this chronic low-grade fire that's just burning in your blood vessels, in your organs, all the time. And this inflammation then travels to the brain and the muscles, accelerating their aging process.
So the gut hub fails, and it starts sending these inflammatory toxins to the muscle hub and the brain hub, making them age faster. It's a domino effect.
Correct. But, and here's the hopeful part, the intervention exercise helps to patch the wall.
How does it do that? How can running fix your intestinal lining?
It seems to do it by altering the microbiome to favor the growth of specific species, like Akkermansia mucinifera.
I've heard of that one.
It's a fascinating bug. It's a specialist in both degrading and producing mucus, so it helps to thicken the protective mucus layer that acts as the first line of defense for the gut wall.
So Akkermansia is like the construction crew that's constantly maintaining the fortifications.
A very good analogy. And not only that, they produce short-chain fatty acids, like butyrate, as a byproduct of fermenting fiber. And butyrate is the preferred fuel source for the gut cells themselves. It gives them the energy they need to keep those tight junctions nice and tight.
Okay, so let's trace this loop. Exercise helps increase Akkermansia. Akkermansia thickens the mucus and makes butyrate. Butyrate feeds the gut cells, which then fix the leak, and the systemic inflammation stops.
The loop is closed. The fire is put out.
Which brings us finally to the third hub, the brain. And we're back in the hypothalamus again.
We keep coming back to the master regulator. The review paper makes a very strong case that hypothalamic inflammation is a primary upstream driver of systemic aging.
And this is the microglia, the brain's resident immune cells sort of going rogue.
They get stuck in a hyperactivated pro-inflammatory state. And this is really bad because the hypothalamus controls so many fundamental processes, including your core body temperature. And one of the most robust findings in all of longevity science is that a lower core body temperature correlates with a longer life.
A cooler engine lasts longer. It's basic thermodynamics.
Exactly. But an inflamed hypothalamus loses its ability to regulate that temperature set point properly. The thermostat essentially breaks. And the body starts to run hot, metabolically speaking, which accelerates aging processes everywhere.
And exercise acts as the fire extinguisher for the brain.
It directly downregulates that microglial activation. It reduces the inflammation in the hypothalamus, which allows it to get back to its job of maintaining that lower longevity-promoting body temperature and metabolic rate.
So if we brought this whole section together, the local to global theory says you can try to intervene at any of these nodes. You can try to fix your muscles or your gut or your brain individually, but exercise is unique.
It's unique because it hits all three hubs simultaneously.
It pumps irisin from the muscles to protect the brain. It seals the gut barrier to stop systemic inflammation. And it directly cools down the hypothalamic thermostat that's driving the whole aging process.
It's the only drug we have that targets all three of these core drivers of aging at the exact same time.
That is just a staggeringly compelling argument for why movement is completely non-negotiable for a long, healthy life. It's not about fitting into your genes. It's about system-wide maintenance.
It's structural engineering for the human body.
I want to pivot to one last study before we start to wrap this all up. We've talked about motivation and endurance and the mechanics of aging, but what about the quality of movement? You know, agility, balance, the things that actually keep you from falling over when you're 80 years old.
And that's not a small thing. Falls are the silent killer for the elderly. A hip fracture in someone over 80 has a massive mortality rate. So maintaining agility is, quite literally, a life or death issue.
This comes from the NPJ Parkinson's Disease Journal, a study from 2025. And they were looking at dopamine again, but this time in the context of motor skill learning in aging mice.
Right. We know from decades of research that dopamine levels decline with age. It's a natural process. And that decline is a big part of why older people and older mice tend to move slower. It's the extreme version of what happens in Parkinson's disease, which is fundamentally a dopamine deficiency disease that results in tremors and rigidity.
So in this study, they put middle-aged mice, and the paper says this is the equivalent of humans in their 50s, on a voluntary running regimen. And the big headline is, it worked. It restored their dopamine levels.
It specifically increased striatal dopamine release. But the real nuance here, the really interesting part, is what that dopamine improved. It didn't necessarily make the mice incredibly strong. Their grip strength was unchanged.
Okay, that's interesting.
But it made them agile. It made them coordinated. They tested them on these complex tasks like pole climbing and making sharp, precise turns. The running mice were just much smoother and more coordinated.
So it wasn't about raw power. It was about improving the signal-to-noise ratio in their movements.
That's a perfect way to describe it. The running fine-tuned their nervous system. It sharpened the motor control loops that depend on dopamine.
Now, there was a specific detail buried in this study regarding the sex differences that I think we have to discuss. The female mice and the male mice behaved very, very differently on those running wheels.
This was fascinating. The female mice, it turns out, were natural ultra runners. When they were given free access to a running wheel, they ran, on average, twice the distance of the males. They just kept going and going.
Okay, so they did double the work. But did they get double the benefit?
No. And that is the crucial catch. They got the exact same boost in dopamine and the same improvement in agility as the males who only ran half as much.
Which strongly implies a ceiling effect.
It strongly suggests a biological plateau. There's a certain dose of exercise you need to trigger this dopamine restoration to flip the switch back on. But doing double or triple that amount doesn't seem to give you double or triple the dopamine.
That is an incredibly practical piece of advice. It means you don't need to be training like an elite athlete to get these profound neurological benefits. You just need to hit the threshold.
The male mice in the study hit the threshold with just moderate, consistent running. The females went way above and beyond that, likely due to hormonal drivers or other factors, but the neurological payoff was capped. For a listener who's trying to optimize for longevity and brain health, this is really great news. Because it means you don't need to run 100 miles a week. You don't need to destroy yourself in the gym. You just need consistency to hit that minimum effective dose.
It brings up the efficiency argument.
Yeah.
If your goal is specifically agility and dopamine restoration, there is a point of diminishing returns.
Exactly. And anything you do beyond that is for sport or for competition or maybe for your ego, which is all perfectly fine, but it's not strictly required for the health outcome we're discussing.
Okay, so let's try to put this all together. Let's synthesize everything. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the microbes in the gut to the hypothalamus in the brain to the fibers in our muscles. If you had to draw a schematic, a feedback loop of exercise based on these 2026 papers, what would that look like?
Okay, let's try. It's a beautiful, self-reinforcing loop. Let's start at the very beginning. You have a healthy gut microbiome, that's source A. You've fed it well with fiber and diverse foods.
Right.
It produces those fatty acidamides, the FAAs. They hit the TRPV1 nerve in your gut, which sends a dopamine-releasing signal to your brain that says, go, it will feel good to move.
So that's motivation. Step one is complete.
You start moving. Your muscles from source C begin to contract. They release irisin and IL-6 into your bloodstream. These myokines travel to your brain to protect your neurons and to your liver to help manage your fuel supply.
That's communication. Step two.
As you keep running, your ventromedial hypothalamus from source B wakes up. Those critical SF1 neurons start firing. They're monitoring the effort. They're taking notes.
That's oversight. Step three.
Then you finish the run. You stop. You take a breath. And now you enter the most important phase, the afterburn. The SF1 neurons keep firing for the next hour, sending a signal down the sympathetic nervous system to upgrade the PGC1 alpha in your muscles. You are now building endurance.
Adaptation. Step four.
And finally, that single bout of exercise has helped to refill your striatal dopamine reserves. That's from source D. This makes you more agile and coordinated for the rest of the day, which protects you from falls and motor decline.
And all this is happening while keeping the three hubs, the muscle, the gut, and the brain, healthy and in communication so they don't drag each other down into senescence.
It is a perfect, elegant, self-reinforcing system, but it requires every single part of that chain to be online and functional.
Which brings me to my final and I think provocative thought for our listener. We talked about the blockade, the idea that stress can interrupt that critical adaptation signal.
The busy signal in the brain.
We're so used to treating exercise as an output. We look at our watch and say, great, I did 500 calories of work. But these studies, taken together, show that exercise is really an input. It's data entry for your nervous system.
Yes, absolutely.
And what happens if you're trying to enter data into a computer that is frozen because it's trying to run way too many other programs in the background? The stress, the anxiety, the lack of sleep, the bad diet.
The data entry fails. The data gets corrupted. It never saves.
And that, to me, is the ultimate takeaway from all this.
Yeah.
You cannot biohack your way around a chaotic, overstressed lifestyle. If your hypothalamus is inflamed from chronic sleep deprivation, or your gut is leaky from a diet of processed food, the signal from the treadmill, no matter how hard you run, will not land.
So we really need to start viewing things like recovery and stress management not as soft skills or luxuries.
But it's biological prerequisites for exercise to even work in the first place.
You have to earn the right to adapt.
You have to earn the right to adapt. I love that. Say more about that.
It's the truth. The body will always, always prioritize survival over adaptation. Adaptation is a luxury. It's something you do when you feel safe. If your body feels unsafe, either biologically from inflammation or psychologically from stress, it won't invest resources in building new mitochondria for tomorrow. It will just hoard resources to try and survive today.
So the prescription from this entire deep dive isn't just go for a run, it's go for a run and then create an internal and external environment where that run actually matters.
Feed your bacteria, clear your mind post-workout, protect that save window, and listen to the signals your body is sending you.
And maybe next time you actually feel like getting off the couch and going for a walk, thank your microbiome. It's not just you, it's a team effort.
A shadow government effort.
Exactly. As always, just a reminder that while we are diving deep into the science, we are analyzing research papers, most of which are on mice. And this is not medical advice. Please consult your doctor before you try to modulate your TRPV1 receptors with a bunch of chili peppers.
Please do. That might have other consequences.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next deep dive.
Keep moving.